Good evening. Hi. Welcome to the public lecture program. Before I begin, I've been asked to mention the upcoming events at the GSD. It's strange to stand here with this bright light, so I don't see anything beyond the first row. So the upcoming event, the first one is the colloquium entitled Sacred Groves and Secret Parks, Orisha Landscape in Brazil and West Africa, and it will take place on October 3rd and 4th in Stubin's room. More information on the schedule and registration is available at the GSD website. The second event is the 2019 Black in Design Conference, Black Futurism, and it will take place at Gund Hall from October 4th through October 6th, and tickets for the conference are now available online. And on Tuesday, October 15, there will be a screening of The Last Black Man in San Francisco in Piper at 6:30 p.m. And now for today's program. It is a great pleasure to introduce this evening Hicham Khalidi. His inspiring curatorial practice provides a public and artistic platform to address societal concerns and urgencies. And I would like to start with a small anecdote. And I'm not sure if he will speak about the project that he has been doing in Beirut, but it's referring to this project. When I read your curatorial statement for the 13th Sharjah Biennale in Beirut and looked through the collection of projects and topics that you brought together, I was reminded of war that I once saw online or followed online. A few years ago, we witnessed the gradual but rapid collapse of Syrian cities, and eventually of Syria, of course. In particular, I remember the footages from the war in Aleppo. These films were captured and streamed in real time by courageous resistance of youth. Amongst them, there were artists and filmmakers and web designers that risked their lives in order to share with the world their devastating struggle against Assad continued and determined massacre. And in one of the footages that they streamed, there was a moment that remained with me. It showed a group of kids, seems then at the age of my kids now, at the age of 8 and 10. And they were joyfully splashing in a pond during an extreme heat wave. The war was very present in all these footages. And around the pond, there were ruins, parts of buildings, burnt furniture, perforated walls, and tons of dust and rubble. The pond itself seemed to appear after an airstrike hit an underground water pipe. The explosion turned the ground around the pipe into a semi-deep puddle, a pool, which unleashed a moment of sheer joy and play for these kids. And I would like to link it to another reference that came out from reading this complex, very complex environment that you often work in, that bring these paradoxes of life, and this is an extreme condition. In Multitude, Hart and Negri borrowed the tale of the golem to remind us that under the outburst of destruction, there is the promise of wonder and creation. And Hisham work explores the power and agency of art and design to imagine a different and better world, while addressing themes such as war and creativity, colonialism and resistance, crisis and human perseverance, but also refuge and nostalgia. And those are not necessarily binaries, but just everyday life conditions. And when I read through your work, I wonder what is our role as educator, as creative people, to challenge this and engage in these very complex conditions that we are taking part of. And so I would like to introduce quickly Hisham now. Hisham is the newly appointed director of the Jan Van Eyck Academie in Maastricht. Before that, he was an associate curator of Lafayette Anticipations in Paris. He was also the artistic and general director of TAG, Institute for Contemporary Art and Music in Den Haag, and the curator of the Act 2 group exhibition in the Beirut Sharjah Biennial in 2017. He served as a cultural attaché to the Biennale in Sydney in 2016, and was the chief curator of the Marrakech Biennale in 2014. He is also appointed to curate the first Chandigarh Biennale of contemporary art, design, and architecture in 2022. And in the statement, it says that the Biennale attempt to bring together art, design, science, and local communities around water-related challenges and the climate crisis. I hope to hear more about your work. Please join me to welcome Hisham.
Thank you, Melkit. Good night. Good evening. Right. You're right. This lamp is quite heavy. Now I feel sorry. I'm not going to speak so much about the Sharjah Biennale. Actually, this is a pity. But we could speak of related issues. Let's say also struggles that one encounters setting up these structures, such as triennals or biennals. Things that are related to cities and that often are intertwined through politics and or different sort of power structures that you have to deal with. And in fact, yes, Sharjah Biennale dealt with youth. It tried to combine and think about a couple of different cities, such as Casablanca with Beirut, with Paris, the suburbs of Paris, with London, and through the eyes of youth, through their struggles. Basically, the question was about what's the position of youth today? There is sort of a binding element that they are all invested in. But then we can speak about that a little bit later if we do the questions and things like that. Actually, I decided to speak about the Rotterdam Triennale, which unfortunately never came to be. And this is also through discussion with Paige and Andros, who will be here later on. Oh, there you are. There's Kartik. Hey, hey guys, just coming in. We thought it would be good, also because this is a place for education, students to talk about these issues, and also to sort of lay down also projects that failed or that didn't come about. So that's why I chose to do that. Well, welcome. I'm Hicham Khalidi. I'm a curator. I make exhibitions. That's what I always say. In the realm of art, design, and fashion. In smaller exhibitions, also in larger ones, such as with the Marrakech Biennale in 2014, the Sharjah Biennale in Beirut, and the Rotterdam Triennale in 2018. At the moment, I'm the director of Jan Van Eyck Academie, which is a post-academy for art, design, and reflection, because we also have literature. We have poetry, but we have many different branches, many different disciplines that come together and speak about content, speak about, At the end of the lecture, I hope to be speaking about the Jan Van Eyck Academie. I'm also one of the curators, as you mentioned, of the first Chandigarh Biennale. in India, which will commence in 2022, together with my colleague Zasha Kola, who you might know from the STUK House initiative in New Delhi in India. Before I continue, I would like to thank the Dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Design, Sarah Whiting, and the Head of Public Programming, Paige Johnston, for inviting me, and also thank you, Malkit, for being able to host me this evening and questioning me together with the public later. And Matt, who he left, for all his help, and many, many thanks to Kartik Pandyan for suggesting my name. This is great. And so I'll be happy to be talking about Rotterdam as a case study, something that might benefit us all. And it's an absolute honor to be here and have this opportunity to not only speak about my work and share with you thoughts related to art, design, and the public space, but to also meet you as people and professionals, like-minded people. So a bit about the structure tonight. So I will spend hopefully 10 minutes speaking about my work in general, past projects, the organizations that I've worked with, mainly also the work at Lafayette Anticipations in Paris between 2015 and 2018. And then I will try to focus my lecture towards the more design-inclined projects, because that's the ones I chose, such as with the work Metamorphosis that I did together with Mary Ping, who is also here, all the way from New York. But there's numerous projects, let's say, that I cannot talk about, and that's okay. That's the nature of these kind of events. And also the question of Harvard GSD to talk about art design and the public space was not so easy for me. Not that I have not engaged in projects as such, but that I feel that the realm and the idea of the public space calls for something other than thinking in terms of art or design solely. There's usually a lot at stake for the people involved. And this I will try to explain later. This also comes back in the Rotterdam Triennial. Then 30 minutes about the Rotterdam Triennial. I did not have a title for this lecture before, but then I thought at the airport, troubles with the Rotterdam Triennial would work out. So that would be the title. This is the reason for that is that the triennial never came about. It should have happened in 2020, but then I left, also because I became the director of Jan Van Eyck Academie, and it was just too difficult to with an event such as that, which you have to build up from scratch, to continue also while working in another organization. One has to do it full time, has to do it completely, otherwise it doesn't work out. So I left, and there's another curator right now, but I cannot tell you about the progress. So this was a struggle, and the setting up of these large structures take much away from your capacity to direct it the way you want. You are prone to all sorts of pressures and troubles that need to be solved before a suitable system is in place to start working from. Basically, you need to build your instrument first before you can start working with it. I will be speaking about the genesis of the project, the ideas and structures, and show some examples of work I had in mind and their consequences. And after that, so I will skip my talk about Marrakech Biennale because I had prepared something, and then touching lightly upon the Chandigarh Biennale and then Jan Van Eyck. So I studied finance, and I cooked for 8 years, and this was my mentor. So, and he instilled in me a kind of creativity in the kitchen, because Saturday evenings, serving 120 people, he would just change the menu and let you deal with it. But he was such a creative person, also a poet. It was interesting. I mean, this man is full of energy, and it's always nice to talk about these people that sort of, in your life, pushed you forward or meant something for you. So this is one of them, Pierre Vint, who became a television cook afterwards. So it's within the cooking. So I cooked for 8 years with this man, or for 4 years with this man, and then after that, I programmed some software and websites, learned PHP, JavaScript, and then after that, started this store concrete, which is still here. So, and it's working worldwide. And basically, this is sort of my start within fashion. And after that, I continue doing that. So when I started TAG, right afterwards, which is a center for music and art and media art, I started sort of working also with fashion. I was interested in people such as Steve Mann of the MIT. I was interested in wearables, and I started to learn about it. And then later on, I worked with Casey Rees, who then was the student of John Maeda. And together we devised this sort of system that you could make one-offs. So can you make sort of unique garments for people out of, you know, programmed software? And then also we made the tennis wear of Serena Williams after that, so it was nice. But at TAG we did many projects, many music-related projects, many media art-related projects. And around 2007, 2008, I felt we were doing PhD art and wanted to deviate from that and got into thinking about other kinds of projects. I did a couple of exhibitions for the Club Transmediale in Berlin, etc., etc. So, but then in 2009, so I started living in Berlin, and then I went to live in Morocco shortly afterwards, and did the first Marrakech Biennale, let's say the one that that was in 2012, I think, 11, and got involved in sort of another kind of thinking, one that was much more related to my own upbringing or to my own as a Moroccan. Yeah. So, so 2012, the first exhibition for the Marrakech Biennale with Carlos Chang and Nadim Saman. And then afterwards, in 2014, I curated, as a chief curator, the Marrakech Biennale 5. After that, I started working at STUK House of Dance and Image in Belgium, in Brussels. Also because my wife got a job at the LCF, the London School of Fashion, so she could just travel from Belgium to London. And then, yeah, 2 years or 3 years after, I started working at Lafayette Anticipations. And many things came together that I've been working on before. So projects related to art, design, fashion all came together. So in Lafayette Anticipations, the idea was simply everything was based on the idea of production. So you would give commissions in art, design, and fashion, and you would follow up on these projects. These are long-term projects. There were apartments, there were facilities. People would just come into Paris, come up with ideas, and you would just produce these things with them. And the nice thing of it, and it's unique, that it's through these different disciplines, through art, design, and fashion projects. One of the first projects that I did was the work of Studio Bruniar and Veronica. At that time, yeah, it was, first we invited Bruniar Sigurd, and at a certain point he started working with his partner. And at first he wanted to make a wave in the opera of Paris. So he wanted to use the water in the catacombs down below, and he wanted to create these waves. That didn't work out. So then he came up with this drawing. I would like to make a circular flute. So then we started sort of thinking about that. How would that be possible to make a circular flute? So we engaged Yves Rosen, who was one of the few flute makers still in Paris. And he worked 6 months to make this flute, which is actually 4 parts that you can stitch together into yeah, a circular flute, into something that could be played by 4 people and listened by 1. The flute can be played in different ways, in parts, or it can be played as a circle. Also, when you engage in a project like that, and the nice thing of Lafayette Anticipations is first you make it and then you see what to do with it. So we started thinking, okay, so what does a circular flute do? When you have a flute, you need also flutists. So coming from my music background, I knew sort of who to engage, so I engaged Michael Schmidt one of the renowned flute makers in the world, or flutists in the world. And he came up with 3 other flutists. And we went to Iceland 10 days in a very small village, Flatey. And they gave us sort of the church, school, and we could practice for 10 days and actually do a workshop about what to do with this flute. You have to see this flute is, when you make such a thing, and they are in a slope, when you make such a thing, you're not thinking about what would happen what would happen if you start to use it. So there's short flutists, there are long flutists. So the playing of the flute then becomes sort of a physical thing. And Brunjar, he's a designer, so he thinks from a design point of view, and wanted to make an instrument, but didn't think about what that instrument would do. So basically that came afterwards. So a whole sort of structure or procedure should then come about from actually making this suggestion or gesture. This flute was also played in an exhibition at the Weber Métal in Paris, where we also showed work of Mary, which I will speak about. This is Lafayette Anticipations now. The building is made by Remco Haas, and the structure basically is an exhibition tower that was placed in the middle of the building with moving platforms. And you can have about 49 combinations when you stick sort of to the levels. But when you go in between, you can have multiple combinations, and many artists use that as well. And yeah, I know Andros, you've been working with it, I think. It's very interesting. It doesn't work so much for art, for objects. It works for performance very well. So that's the discussion to have with Remco Haas. Yeah. Also something, you make something and then you see what to do with it. But it, in fact, is fantastic. So it looks like this. This is an exhibition of Simon Fujiwara about Anne. So you can see the platform. So basically one floor is now down, and there's sort of a half platform that is not unreachable. So you get all these different spaces. So places that you can reach, spaces that you can't reach. You can also build, like with Lucy Mackenzie, we built stairs in between, and it's quite playful, actually, to work with. With work of Yves Chabanon and Julien Cruzet. So one reason why it doesn't work is if you look at the floor. Oh, I can't go back. Yeah. If you look at the floor. So in order to make the floors move, you need to have machinery. The machinery is within the floors. But then again, the floors are wood, but you need to be able to access the machinery. So they made these sort of squares. You see the squares there? That you have to pull them up. But that doesn't work in an exhibition setting, right? So those kind of things. So basically an architect does something, but then the curator has to work with it. There's no communication. It's a big problem. Yeah. Anyways, so, and also it's very in your face, metal, and there's lights under the floor, which is really nice because then you can use the floors as sort of light settings. So you can make a scenography with these floors. The opening with Gérard Depardieu. Yeah, that was good. And then, so this is a sort of to show you how these floors work. It's really interesting because there's two floors basically that are divided by two, which you also can have down completely. And then you have an 18 meters height. You can use it as a tower, really. Or you can divide it in different ways. Make a gallery or something like that. So the first exhibition, Faisons de l'inconnu un allié, making the unknown your ally. So basically uncertainty as an element, you know, in life. Well, this is the work of Ingwe Holland that I worked with, a Porsche Panamera, the only family car that can go 220 kilometers an hour. So imagine your kids in this car. So he decided to cut it in four. Also, but this is interesting. I mean, you would think, okay, cutting the Panamera in four, that should be doable. we needed to use the people that cut the Concordia in Italy in order to cut this car. And then you get something like that. What I found really interesting is it looks like an iPhone in the inside. And imagine that this technology is built around you and you're sitting in the car. This is amazing. So it speaks of design, it speaks of sort of a functionality, but also of a certain kind of danger or a certain kind of, So I thought it was a really interesting project. And this is also something that Ingve came with. He was interested in this project. He always wanted to do this. So we allowed for it to happen. The work with Mary Payne, which I will speak about later. Utopia 2, we made a volume of magazines together with Perks and Mini, dealing with, well, actually it was sort of inspired by Comme des Garçons magazine, which also came in a volume of 10. The work of Camille Bladrix. His work is beautiful. It anticipates function whilst there is none. It's a sort of a machine that moves, but you wouldn't know what it is. You know, it's like, is it a vacuum cleaner? Is it a whale? You know, sort of this. It's very beautiful. His work is. You can't denote what is art, design, whatever. I mean, it's sort of an object. And then the beautiful work, Metamorphosis, that we did with Mary Ping, which is an iteration of bags that reference certain elements of bags we would know, of iconic bags. Also relating and commenting on luxury. And we did this together with the Delma group in Valentano, which is a beautiful place with 22 ateliers, where they kind of have thought about how to industrialize craft. And we worked together with them, and Mary created a beautiful 14-day performance where we had the research department of the Delma group coming over to Paris and do the performance for 14 days and make these bags and all of these iterations. The work was also shown in MoMA at the Is Fashion Modern show. And also Mary won the Cooper Hewitt Prize recently as well, so that's really great. And the iteration of the bags is that elements sort of build up until you see the last bag. So also interesting to say is that the Lafayette Anticipations is part of is the foundation of Galeries Lafayette. It's also common to Galeries Lafayette. It's a luxury store. And this is also something that we were concerned with. So why would we be in such a situation? Foundation, part of this huge conglomerate. What is our function? What is our role in that? So we were really thinking about these issues and trying to sort of find a way. Lucy Mackenzie, whose work is a combination of trompe-l'œil and architectural sort of objects. This work is based on the Villa de Ooyevaar, which she bought in Oostende, which you see there. It used to be a house that was set up by a sort of a neo-Nazi doctor, and all of these elements you could find back in that house. And she used that narrative in her furniture and in the work that she made. All of this is sort of also a reference to the paintings in the house and the furniture, and so it's sort of a fictional setting of a real space. And Lucy Mackenzie's work is much about that, sort of to build this. To build a new situation out of a real one or an older one. And then Les Centres ne peut tenir. But I'll just go on because I don't have much time. The first Rotterdam Triennale, Interlocality from South to the Global South. This was the working title. I'll start reading a little bit of the text that I wrote, and also I'm very happy that I had the chance to do this, because usually you go from one project to the other and you never have time to rethink about what you did. And this is one of those chances. So I started writing about it, and also relieved me somewhat of a pressure. So the starting point of the triennial was the area of Rotterdam South. Its culture, its people, its geography, its demographics, its feelings, its aspirations, its politics. The title of the triennial, Interlocality, From South to the Global South, gave rise to discussions and thought about how space and identity relate to each other. Interlocality is a term that can be entered as a concept that is both local and a movement in between the different local identities and between local and global communities, both geographically as in concept. For instance, as in relation to Dutch culture, Surinamese, a former Dutch colony, so Surinamese food here is not the same as Surinamese food there. It is delineated as Surinamese, but it is in fact also Dutch, and also from Rotterdam and from Rotterdam South. So one can go as far as to say the food is a unique product of this or that person. So one jumps from a geographical delineation to a personal one, including all of the circumstances and histories and context the person is in, and of influence on this or that particular food or product or thing. So we can take this even further. The person today is not the same person as yesterday and will not be the same person tomorrow. Not only social and societal change is of importance, but also physical, biological change. And a multitude of other changes are of importance to understand, or even begin to understand the complexity behind identity and identity thinking. So as you can see, I was trying to I posed this term interlocality, was sort of trying to find out what did I mean with it. So for me, I was interested in, so what are all of these elements that you can find within a city that are rooted in many different places at the same time? And how do they sort of communicate with each other? How do they, so where do we find this interlocal idea, this interlocal feeling, this feeling that we have of all these things that we see? So to understand this in a better way, I was inspired by the Belgian scholar and performance researcher Joachim Ben Yacoub. Oh yeah, this is the list of artists, okay. Who wrote a seminal text on the work of Selma and Soufiane Wissi, the Tunisian dancers, choreographers, and artistic directors of Dream City in Tunis, a performance and dance festival that started during the Arab Spring in Tunis. In an article titled De Gedroomde Samenwerking, roughly translated into the collaboration that we dreamed of, itself a title referencing the book of sociologist Willem Schinkel, The Society That We Dreamed Of, Ben Yacoub takes the work of Selma and Soufiane, and specifically the work here, and an S between brackets, here's, they performed during Meeting Point 6 in 2011. So Meeting Points is the performance and art festival organized then by the Youth Arab Theatre Fund, and now it's called Mafradat. It is in Brussels. And Meeting Points takes place in many cities at the same time. In this work, Selma and Soufiane respectively perform and stream their parts of the work in the city of Tunis and Paris simultaneously. And the work is screened live at Argos, the film and video archive in Brussels. So here we have 3 locations that are blended into one virtual space, embodying multiple localities, and with all of the consequences such as aspects of time, technical delay, technological mediation in relation to body and performance and the public. So what you see here is Soufiane and Selma in a screen. This is at BMW Tate Live. So although absolutely important and worthwhile to think about the technological aspects of delay and mediation and performativity of the work, I wanted for now to concentrate on the idea of multiple localities. So what are localities? What is locality? Instead of thinking of the conventional meaning of the word, that is position or place of something, I was drawn by the idea that there are aspects of locations, certain specificities that are present but absolutely unnameable, and that they had to deal with emotions, nostalgia, feelings, politics, and that they were blended and were driven by context. For instance, why does one feel Dutch, Surinamese, or from Rotterdam all at the same time, and depending on context and location can switch between these identities. One can also ask, what is Dutchness, or Surinamese-ness, or Rotterdamness, or Moroccanness? What is the blend of these? And why are these feelings specific to location and context? Somehow the work here, and then S between brackets, investigates these aspects of multitude and simultaneity of the here and now, a blending of there and here at once. And despite the defunct of technology and its uses, it utilizes the power of technology to at least bring together the here and there in the now. In the words of Joachim, and I translate this in English for you, and I paraphrase, as the title here, as reveals, this live performance reveals the virtual embodiment of multiple localities. If we speak of the here, we still speak of a singular locality that resists another locality there. In other words, in terms of language, it is difficult to speak of here in a plural form. Recalibrating the term politically is also difficult, as it is constituted by power relationships. By connecting Paris with a former colony, the third space, that is formed challenges our ideas of history and geography alike. So as you may see, we are speaking of a complexity of things such as location, specificity, plurality, third space, a term you might know of through the work of geographer Edward Soja. So whether we are speaking of third space or plural space or interlocal spaces, perhaps we mean the same thing, or perhaps we are denoting or pointing towards a complexity of things and issues we are all trying to grasp and have a hard time finding the right words for. As always, language follows intuition, a hunch or a thought. So with the Rotterdam Triangle, you're in a different situation every time. You enter a new city, you enter a new place, you would like to understand this place. So basically, you're trying to find tools in order to understand these places. Locality is a form of that. Is like a way to try to understand it. So another strain of research and inspiration came from the work of moral philosopher Kwame Anthony Appiah, who actually recently spoke in the US a couple of weeks ago at Yeshiva University. Appiah, scholar, teacher, ethicist, explains that we have multiple identities which we negotiate on a daily basis. He himself, and he apparently explains this further in his latest book, The Lies That Bind, Rethinking Identity, and I quote this directly from the university's website announcement, a statement he has made several times before in speeches and lectures, that he is a child of a British mother and a Ghanaian father, a brown-skinned man, a vaguely British accent, who is happily married to his husband. His identity is shaped by this mix of gender, creed, country, color, class, and culture. And so is the identity of everyone in the audience. So he's pointing towards the audience that he will be speaking to after. So in his work, he regularly refers to the dynamics of identity and aspects of that we may choose from depending on the situation. Also, he refers to context and choice. Who one is or feels is always up for dispute. Well, this is something I don't completely agree with, because I think that these multiple identities are always there. So we can choose, but basically, and that each of these identities may garner precedence or priority, but I think that the idea of multiple identities is much more complex. I think that we have these multiple identities at once. They are present in us at once. So for instance, when you're talking to a person, you are talking to all of these identities simultaneously. So basically, you can choose, but it's you're basically talking to many different persons at the same time. Trying to understand the genus loci of Rotterdam South led me think about what constitutes the area, who are its people, who feels aligned to it, and who feels rejected. Rotterdam South is a plethora of cultural structures that manifest itself in food, work, leisure, education, belief, and many other things. It is plural by definition, and its people are plural and dynamic, and connected to multiple places and ideas simultaneously. Think of superposition in science. This could be called cultural superposition. Scholars are also using the term superdiversity to denote this immense complexity of people and origins in cities. The term interlocality gave me and my partners, curators Anna Makic, a Dutch Bosnian architect, and she's the writer of a beautiful book called Mortal Cities and Forgotten Monuments, about identity and nationality in former Yugoslavia. Laureen Bayard, a Dutch architect, and Karima Boudou, a Moroccan curator, the possibility to try to dissect and understand the city and its human complexities. So, the subtitle From South to the Global South came later and indicated the movement from a geographical classification to a socio-economic demographic classification. The German Institute the Global South Studies Center, part of the University of Cologne, explains it in terms of the world is no longer divided in the West versus the non-West, or the first to the third world, but in socio-economic precarious areas compared to less precarious areas. So this way a comparison can be made between, for example, Detroit or the south of Chicago with Rotterdam South, but also with areas in the MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa, Africa or Southeast Asia. So one can also speak of south to north relationships, denoting classifications of class and contemporary power relationships. And most importantly, the idea of interlocality from south to the global south was not aimed to highlight precarity and the precarious for its own sake, but rather to focus on the agency and the enormous resilience and initiative for people in these disadvantaged areas. And a good example of this agency and resilience and pride in the Rotterdam Southern culture becomes clear in this picture. So where we see a man with the Swan Bridge of architect Wim Krauwels tattooed on his back. The Swan Bridge is the main bridge connecting the north with the south. Another statement we were immediately confronted with when starting our research was the statement, "What you do for us, without us, is against us." A statement the locals made to explain their attitude towards collaborating with people and organizations that had an interest in the area of Rotterdam South. So you can come here, but be careful, the statement reads. Among other things, we use this statement as a guideline to investigate the complexities of the local to the local, and the local to the global at a historical, socioeconomic, artistic, and cultural level. And because what did this statement mean? Who were us? It is also a gesture of resistance, and this resistance came hitting us in the face. So, after hearing about the upcoming triennial, artist and curator colleagues living in Rotterdam and beyond wrote an important letter and published this in Versbeton. To translate, this is fresh concrete. It's an important magazine for architecture and city development in Rotterdam. So in the article, the role of biennials and triennials in the development of cities and the subsequent consequences of continuing gentrification strategies and city marketing were scrutinized. I will read you parts of this manifesto that was written in Dutch and that I translated for you into English, accompanied by a slide of a billboard. Yeah. Something beautiful as at the horizon, an advertisement for condominiums to be built, as this is the first thing you see when you enter Rotterdam South. So the part that I'm going to read that was published is as follows. So not very long ago, in a city and country quite close by, people built bridges to the unexplored site that they had heard talk about, but never actually been. They were cozy and comfortable. But now the tourists are coming here too, with their hostels and bachelor parties. It was time to take a look at the dark side. Gentrification is a scary, communicable disease that people from the capital carry with them. And art is not just art, but one of its very first symptoms. When you see art arriving, along with bridges, refurbished facades and streets, when squares are suddenly cleaned up, tiled, and revamped with grass, trees and sculptures, does this not itch you? In the city of Forward, which is the translation of the word vooruit, which means forward, our people live together with good intentions. Although with low incomes, they have high culture. They arrive with diverging museums and expanding interests. They are the missionaries of progress. They build bridges and construct cycle paths, so they can say that they were the first to arrive in these undiscovered places. In this land of comrades, solidarity is nowhere to be found. And yes, the missionaries talk about social sculptures and neighborhood participation. But who really benefits from it? What does art mean for the local residents? Is art really involved with neighborhoods when it comes rolling out as a standard project again? So this was a clear message, also directed to the organization and to the triennial. Basically, it said, we're not interested. We want structural change. So while we were sort of constructing these ideas of identity, we did not manage to harness the will and the trust of the local art community. And to them, the triennial was not an opportunity, but a danger. And also, important to say that it's not that we didn't think about the complexities related to what a triennial can do, with it, in terms of city marketing, development, and all of these things. But we failed to forge a base of trust. And I also think we could never have, so I will explain later a little bit. So basically, what we wanted to do, so you see this, the River de Maas and the harbor, and the upper side is the north and the lower side is the south, is to sort of create an axis on which to show works or to work with different organizations and institutions. So where you see the black spots, 1, 2, 3, 4, those would be the main venues. Where you see the orange would be public artworks. Where you see red, they would be public programs. Also in collaborations with many different institutes, such as a boxing, a place where you can learn to box, or a garden, the Avicenna College, a bar, a 24-hour shop, all of these things. And then we also had a partner program. Also, the idea of the triennial was sort of born out of the wish of SUR, which is the Sculpture International Rotterdam, in order to expand to the south. 95% of the works that they and activities that they did were in the north, and only 5% of the south. Sculpture International Rotterdam is the main organization in Rotterdam that organizes and maintains the public sculptures of Rotterdam. They own about 60. And they wanted sort of, yeah, you can imagine, I mean, the south is almost half of the Rotterdam population, but it doesn't have any of these facilities. Also, that in the Netherlands in 2012, because of the cuts, SUR was reduced from an international organization, let's say the size of Public Art Agency in Sweden, to basically a one-man show with a small international public program. So this triennale would do two things for them. It would re-establish SUR as an important player of art in the public space, and at the same time meet the need of engaging into meaningful activities in Rotterdam South. So they published this call, and called me to pitch in. So I did and won the pitch, established a team, and traveled every other week to Rotterdam South. And I worked in an existing cultural center, which is on, well, you see the picture in a minute, I think number 5, and basically in an office of 4 by 4 meters. And from there I could really work and try to understand the city. And also talk to different stakeholders and partners and see what is possible. So I connected to a couple of local artists that functioned as liaisons, and the first question to us that was posed by them, so why choose an outsider curator, someone not familiar with Rotterdam or the scene? My answer to that was that I could operate from a novice position, which would give me an interesting insight in the city and its workings. This question also implied that any biennial triennial could only be run by local artists or curators, or at least they should be part of the curatorial team, something I absolutely support. But then again, I felt already lost because I was put between the organization that gave the assignment, SIR, and the local art community, which then they also supported. And this is because SIR is part of CBK, which is the Center of Fine Arts, and they subsidize the Rotterdam artists. So this is also important. So when you set up something like that, the basis of trust should be on all levels. Let me just see. Furthermore, Rotterdam South has its own biennale called Chalot Speciaal. And this biennale caters mostly to the local artists, most subsidized by the Center of Fine Arts. Every 2 years, they would showcase projects of about 100 artists in Charloes. Charloes is the left side of the south. I don't have a, but it's okay, on the left side. So, so Rotterdam South already had a biennale that functioned well. So why have another one? Well, the answer of SIR, an answer which we somehow supported with hesitation, the triennial structure is international and would play on the world stage. It would invite international artists and combine them with the local scene. It would be able to bridge the local with the international and convince all of the stakeholders, including national and international organizations and entities, to do so. So the local biennale resisted this idea and questioned whether it wasn't possible to enhance its capacity to move towards an international profile. So maybe what is important to take from this is setting up something like that is to garner the trust of the local entities. And also the question that comes from these local entities is, so the question would be then, would you want to work from the local situation, and why would you, so why the question of why having an international triennial in a city like this? So that's the main question. What are the reasons behind it? There was sort of a clear acrobatic split, which we call in Dutch a spagaat. This is something you will encounter anywhere. When you have, on the one side, an international profile, on the other side, a local one. So it's very difficult to cater to both. Important also to say that when we were there, we were sort of engaging with many different local organizations, of which the Kochetepe Mosque was one. The Kochetepe Mosque was important for me because it was a mosque that already existed 25 years and had a history there. So it was also a place, it was built by Van der Steur, who also built Boijmans van Beuningen in a museum. They made a dome on top of it, and it was sort of a mix of, let's say, sort of an Islamic gesture with a modern one. And that was interesting for me to sort of, that was a good starting point. I'll show you pictures in a minute of that. On one side, the Kochetepe Mosque. On the other side, Chalot Speciaal, which is then the biennale. So for me, it was actually quite a good thing. You already have a biennale, why not incorporate it within a triennial? So you have on the left side, you have an existing structure. On the right side, you would have something like the Kochetepe Mosque, and then other existing structures that you would sort of incorporate or that you would work with. And at a singular moment, you could sort of combine these programs and be on for the period that you would have the triennial. So also the triennial was set up in order to follow larger projects that were already going on, such as the Tide Park, where you see number 2, the building of a new Tide Park, and all of these larger structures. So these are the axes. So all of this played out while we were doing research into the possibilities of a triennial in the South, talking to stakeholders, government agencies, and making a long list of artists, and deliberating with the organization where to best place the triennial. Also interesting, it came out of discussions that we had related to the collection of SIR. If the North had a collection of sculptures placed in the main artery of the city of the North, what projects or activities would fit the South? So just placing sculptures of important famous artists or designers would not work. The triennial should be a research platform, as much an immaterial gesture as a material one. The triennial should engage itself into the fabric of society and people. This meant SIR would deviate from its profile of curating sculptures for the city to being curators of public space. So, given that the South was neglected in any way possible, politically, socially, the need to engage was more stringent than ever. So, important to note that Rotterdam South had already many community projects that were done successfully and unsuccessfully, most notably by Jan Van Eyck, who you might know, and Christine Seijveld, Jan Konings, Christine Meindertsma. And one of these projects is interesting to discuss. A little bit of information. The collected knitwear of Loes Veenstra. Loes Veenstra is a resident of Carnisse, one of the neighborhoods, who in 60 years had knitted over 500 sweaters. Never worn, designer Christine Meindertsma came up with the idea to engage the neighborhood to celebrate the work of Veenstra. Disentangle the work here. So first there's the design project of Christine, and secondly there is Loes Veenstra. So what does she feel and how is she involved in the project? And most of all, what remains afterwards? So a question that you posed. So there can be a clear disconnect between the agent designer and the subject person. So there are clearly different agendas and feelings at stake. So that was a clear issue for us. The people we wanted to work with should not become pawns in our design and art game. I'm not saying that this is the case here, but I'm just saying you're treading on a sort of a, it's important to think about these things. So also my main question, which I also posed to Magdalena Malm, Director of Public Art Agency in Sweden, because of their years of experience in these kind of projects, is when does representation become transformation? So when does a project such as this become change for people in the city and neighborhoods? So here's the crux. And this is also something I wanted to discuss with Jan Van Eyck, whom you all know. And when you start a company or a social enterprise of sorts as an art project, a project in which you help people, but still it is an art project, when do you cease to be an artist and become a social worker? So somewhere you are shifting from representation to reality, perhaps back and forth. So this is also something I wanted to discuss, for instance, with Ahmed Oud, who I've worked with in his project, The Silent University, or Yves Chabanon, who also works a lot with refugees, disadvantaged people. Somewhere you would want the project to remain in the representational realm. You would like to own it as an artist, or is something else happening? And another way of looking at it is, and as Jessie Darling explains, whom I've worked with in the Sharjah Biennale in Beirut, she says that the ethics of and against power are inseparable from aesthetics. The right of representation is forever meshed with representation itself. So first, she understands that aesthetics and ethics are in fact the same thing, and secondly, she separates the two meanings of representation. One is an artistic one that deals with depiction, presentation, portrayal, reproduction, illustration, showing, imaging, and so on. And a second one to represent someone in political terms, in general, to take the place for, or to defend someone, or to stand for someone or something. So that is sort of the tension you are working with or looking for as well. And this is nice also for discussion afterwards. So let us return to Rotterdam South. I don't know if this is the right slide. Yeah, okay, I'll just, yeah. A couple of facts. Rotterdam South is a city of 240,000 people. It is the home of more than 440 cultures. It was established and grew out of the need for housing for harbor workers. The harbor was the main employer. It is one of the few cities in the Netherlands that functioned as an experimental basis for architects and city developers. So every neighborhood in the area is different and is built dealing with different issues and values. Art historian Marienke Steenhuis lays out these episodes to mark the evolution of the city area in a beautiful essay that she wrote especially for us and the reader that also accompanied the Triennial artists. The government was just to embark on a €130 million injection in Rotterdam South to recalibrate the area. So she writes in the essay, so the cabinet decision of March 15, 2018 to spend €130 million extra in Rotterdam South has taken the last hesitation away from market-oriented parties. Substantial investments are being made in the South. Since 2010, the Rotterdam National Programme, the only national program related to specific local issues of Rotterdam South, instigated by the government, ran a program to deal with an area with un-Dutch problems. Since 2010, they worked on education, unemployment, neighborhood improvement, and home improvement. Rotterdam South is layered, rich, complex, and elusive. And despite the many negative reports about the South, the inhabitants are very loyal to it. Only the inhabitant of Zuid knows what Zuid really is. She continues. It is a laboratory of social and physical engineering, where a strong government worked for 80 years to establish a layered urban fabric in which the well-being of the residents was put central. Rotterdam South is the place where the municipality built houses for the poorest, where modern architects were fully experimenting, where the harbor kings realized housing for their own workers, where after the war large-scale Levy garden districts such as Pendrecht, Zuidwijk, and Lombardije were built, and where one cadence was heard in all living rooms, which is the cadence of the ports. Besides all of these beautiful things said here, think of this statement, un-Dutch problems. This statement stems from a nationalist policy and a conservative attitude in Rotterdam South, with a focus based on security, reducing criminality, and a nostalgia to bring back the harbor structure and its long-gone industry again, perhaps much like the coal industry here. The statement is also a reference to the many migrants living in Rotterdam South. But the harbor was no longer. Big parts of it ceased to exist many years ago. It was time for tourism and leisure, and this actually called for the implementation of a cultural fabric. But the issue is that culture was not part of the conservative package offered by the government, and the need for alternative industries was large. The housing that once harbored the harbor workers now maintained poor unemployed local residents, third-generation migrants, Polish builders, refugees, and artists. From figures of the national program itself, almost half of the population in Rotterdam South is unemployed. This is the poorest city area in the Netherlands. Another problem exacerbating the problems in the minds of people in Rotterdam South is in fact also a blessing. Because of the surge in housing prices in Amsterdam and the focus of the city to engage and attract head offices of big firms, the city of Amsterdam attracts mainly well-to-do and well-paid financial workers, well-paid financial workers from around the world, sorry. Many of the single and double income families were pushed towards the outskirts of the city and to Rotterdam South. In the South, these were the new yuppies that in the eyes of the local community were seen as the instigators of the increase in housing prices. So other reasons were the development of Feyenoord City, a thematic city area within Rotterdam South, built around the football stadium of the main football club Feyenoord. And all of this led to a focus on Rotterdam South as the new place to be. And this and other factors I talked about put fears in the hearts of the artists and local residents. A good example of this is another statement made by local people. Many of these so-called yuppies would live in the Kop van Zuid, translated into the head of South, which is the north part of the South. The feeling that the locals had in relationship to the ongoing gentrification of the Kop van Zuid was that the head of South had become the butt of the north. They felt pushed down by the rear end of the rich and privileged. So you can see that this was the feeling. The Kop van Zuid, which is where you see sort of this movement, which is Rotterdam South, then was pushed down because it was gentrified. So they felt that the Kop van Zuid, which is the name of that part, became the butt of the north. So so these were the things that we had to sort of deal with. It's good also to lay these things out. And especially also with these kind of structures when you start a new structure. I mean, if you look at Istanbul Biennale or Sydney Biennale, I mean, Istanbul Biennale exists for 25 years, Sydney I think as well. So they've gone through the processes. But to set them up, the same thing in Chandigarh right now, is a very difficult process. Also, a couple of numbers. I mean, there is basically one metro line, and in Rotterdam South, and in Rotterdam North there is 5. There is, you know, it's a very limited system. One tram line, not many buses. Many of the kids living in Rotterdam South don't have access basically to the north, which is the center. So there's actually a lot of spatial discrimination going on in the city. Well, still, there's 240,000 people living there, and it's interesting to see all of these things, and also to see the aspirations of the government and the city and the municipality. And then there is this influx of double income families, the influx of, let's say, the higher income families, the mix of that. And it's interesting to see what happens to a city like that. And this is sort of the material that you then have to work with. So basically, and also I tried to sort of devise the triangle by using existing structures and functional structures. So like a Kochetepe mosque is a functional structure. So you would have to do that through the organization, through the people that are working there. Well, maybe I can go a little bit further. And then regarding the collection of Sur, it was interesting to look at a few cases of which I thought were interesting and maybe could also provide an idea of what kind of works you would want to have there. And this is a work of Elm Green and Drag set. It's never too late to say I'm sorry.
Een heel parmantig mannetje met een platte pet, daar komt hij aan.
De koolsingel begon vertrouwd te raken met het dagelijks verschijnen van de performer, die op tijd It is never too late to say sorry door de megafoon riep. Dit heb ik 2 winters geleden gevonden. En ik zoek eigenlijk iets soortgelijks. Dat is er nu niet. En
Ik zie dit ding al jaren staan. Ik heb nog nooit geweten dat we een koolsingel hadden.
Het houdt nu ook op, hè?
Halen ze het
Dus,
weg?
ja, er is geen geld meer voor.
Hij kan het voor niks doen.
Je kwam hier, het was één grote puinmassa.
40 sleutelpakken uit mijn rechterbroekzak. 50 aankomst, ontsluiten van de sloten. Het carillon dat zijn melodietje liet horen.
It is never too late to say sorry.
So, maybe interesting to look back at the comment in the article that I talked about, with the question for whom is the art for, or who benefits from it. When looking at this work, I came to the conclusion that we might not be there for the benefit of anyone. Artworks have no obligation to do something, but to be engaging or to opening up a situation, whether called for or not. So basically you're forging change through something else than social work, but through representation, or in this case, narrative, drama, or story. So I was thinking like, maybe that's a way out. That's sort of a, this is the work of Cosima van Bonin, The Idler's Playground. That was also replaced or placed in Rotterdam South. It was in the north before, and then it was placed in Rotterdam South. Actually, yeah, I don't have a good picture of that. That's a pity. Yeah, so really important also as well is like the local public looks at these kind of works in a completely different way. So for them, yeah, there's really a disconnect with your intentions and so that's also important, is that would these kind of conventional structures work? Is this the way to go forward? So this is a beautiful work of John Kermlin, of which I think definitely does work, because it asks this question, why 1989? What the hell is wrong with that? What is this? What am I looking at? And this is in Rotterdam South. It's a permanent work. So yeah. So these are also structures that you then can also incorporate, that you can work with. You don't have to come up with new works. You can incorporate older structures, older works into the event, let's say, to re-explain. This is a beautiful work by a group of architects, and I just lost their names, who basically wanted to shift an old bridge that wasn't used towards one side of the harbor, and then create a cycling path. Because the north and south can only be accessed through bridges, and this could become the only cycle path, basically, and then use sort of the middle, the water front would become sort of a mass or an object by itself. I thought it was a fantastic project. It was never done. It was commissioned, but it was never made. And this is a beautiful project of Vera Kroese that did take place here and there. One side of there's a tunnel. On one side of the tunnel it says here, and on the other side of the tunnel it says there. Also sort of pointing towards the difference, the north and the south. But this has never become a permanent work. It was a temporary work. What we want, so basically, I had my office in the Cultuurwerkplaats. This is this small element in the middle of this sort of V. Together with Adrien Tertiot, an artist, a Belgian artist, we wanted to devise this structure that could be used for performances and lectures. But the structure would go through the buildings, and it was also the office of the national program. So we wanted to access this entity, this organization that is responsible for the social program of Rotterdam South, in order also to forge this discussion with them. So why are we here? And the national program, basically their focus was on jobs security, very limited. Culture was not part of that. Yeah, this is an example of that. Adrien Ticcio works a lot with this kind of structures. This is a work that he did in Leuven during the Thomas More event, where he talked with neighborhoods, with people in neighborhoods, whether they wanted to be private or or make their house into a public space. So, depending on the answer, whether they wanted to keep their privacy or to share their house basically or their garden, he built the structure. So the form of it would then represent this idea of public and private. And it was a walkthrough. Yeah, other people, Mohamed Bourouissa. Yeah, this is a project, you might know it. He did this in Philadelphia. I'm just showing now projects that we, or people or artists that I
Greater Manchester, we're
thought we
showing
should
Mohamed Bouroussa's Horse Day.
work with. So this is a project that he did in Philadelphia, Horse Day, working with the Afro-American community that, yeah, they were horse riders already for 100 years. They had this tradition of horse riding in the city. So he spent 9 months there working with them. And he created this event where they also would make artworks for the horses, and it was also a music event, etc.
What's great about Mohamed's piece is that it shows us what happens when you connect artists with a community and embed that spirit of creativity. You can make things beautiful and meaningful with whatever you have to hand.
Yeah, other stores. So I might just, this is the Kochetepe Mosque. As you can see, it has the dome. So this was built afterwards, right? So you have this modernist building with a dome. This is the work of Robert ten Hartog, who made many photographs in the 70s and 80s. This is also the period that that we moved to Morocco, to the Netherlands from Morocco. And yeah, so this is something really interesting to look at. So this is the Kochetepe Mosque in the 70s. And then to work with several artists to, yeah, this is Selma and Soufiane. We'll see. I'll just run through it so we can maybe have a discussion, which is much. This is interesting. Pim Fortuyn was a politician in the Netherlands who got shot. He was an advisor to the liberals, but then he moved to the right side, let's say, more to the right side. He became the first sort of nationalist of the Netherlands. He was killed, and they wanted to erect a statue for him. But then the statue went under a bridge and the head fell off. And it was really interesting. Christoph Buchel, the Icelandic artist, wanted to make a project with this. So he put the statue on this truck, and then he would drive it through the city and just place it. And it's a wonderful project to think about, and also to think about. I mean, that's the first impression of it. It's great. But then, okay, the next one is like, okay, so what does it do? What is it really about? And then again, back to representation. So, are we dealing here with? Yeah. So yeah, are we dealing with representation or reality? So this is very important for me. Also in the work that he did in Venice, it's maybe easier to. If I just go back, sorry. You might have seen it, where he created a mosque out of a church, because there wasn't a mosque in Venice. This project lasted only 2 weeks because they closed it because of security reasons. But then you can see in the front there is a pathway for the public. So he basically making a pathway, he created sort of a representational space. It became like a theater. But it's people praying there, really. So what's happening? Then you get a merger of a real and a representational space at the same time, which is fantastic and interesting to think about. yeah, it's a small line towards disaster, let's say. Yeah, so I won't be speaking more about, because then we have time for some questions and to really have a discussion, because this more needs discussion. So Marrakech Biennale, I'm not going to talk about, sorry. Well, Chandigarh Biennale, I do want to say something about. So Chandigarh Biennale is in the north of India, and so Chandigarh was built in 1946 because of the separation of India with Pakistan, and Lahore, which was the main city of the Punjab region, was given to Pakistan, and then Nehru felt that he needed a new city, so they built Chandigarh between the two rivers. So Chandigarh was first set up by an American team, but because of the death of one of its designers, they asked Le Corbusier to build the city, and Le Corbusier built it with his team. So basically you get 300 buildings of Le Corbusier and Pierre Jeanneret, his nephew. So it's a fantastic place to be and to work in. Then again, the Biennale is about water, and this is something put forward by Amrit Boularia, the founding mother, the founding person of this Biennale, that she really wanted to do a project about water. And the reason for that is because Chandigarh is at the foot of the Himalaya Kush region, and the Himalaya Kush region is also called the third reservoir, the third pole. Why? Because it's the third largest reservoir of water in the world, next to the Antarctic and the Arctic. 250 million are fed by this in the region, let's say, in the corridor. But there's 1.5 billion people that are, that need to live from that. So, and there's a couple of things that are sort of exacerbating the problems in India and the water problems. One of them is the agricultural situation. In the 50s, Nehru also stopped importing grain, and he started his own system within the Punjab, and the Punjab became the cradle of India for food. But it was monoculture and heavily dependent also on pesticides, and these pesticides contaminate the water. So they, at the moment, deal with, because of climate change, the failure of the system of the Himalaya Kush corridor. At the same time, they're dealing with pollution. At the same time, they're dealing with the level of groundwater that is lowering because of all these problems with the water management. And this year, for the first time, the city of Chennai had no water, for instance. So it's a huge problem. Then comes the question, what can you do? So with the biennale, I mean, it's also a question I'm posing with Jan Van Eyck. So this is in one of the villages. So we have some suggestions of works, but then all of these works can work sort of on a, let's say an illustrative or level, but actually you want to devise a new system or another kind of system. And with the Jan Van Eyck, we're posing, based on several books that I thought would be interesting also for you. You might have read them. We're posing a question as well at Jan Van Eyck, and we're going to set up several projects, of which the Urgency Marathon, which we will do every year. It's a 5-day symposium dealing with this issue, with the question of how art and design deal with urgency and crisis. So what is the role of art and design in this? So also interesting, I thought that we can discuss as well. So maybe we can start discussions and have the Jan Van Eyck pictures in the back. Yeah?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you, Hisham. I have so many comments and notes, and I filled few pages, but I would like to echo one of the questions that you put forward in one of your publications is how can we upturn the legacies of modernity, which I think is very much present in many of the projects and the problem and these issues that that you are dealing with, both as an artist, but also what it means to work in Rotterdam South, which, if I'm not mistaken, it's 80 or 90% of the youth population is minority, right?
I don't know if it's that much, but it's a lot, yeah.
So there is a lot of pressure to rethink about what a Dutch city means, right?
Yeah.
And who inhabit the Dutch city, and who is Dutch. So these questions about identity, or the question about monoculture, or nationalism, etc., are also questions about the failure of modernity, and how we are bound to systems that are not talking to reality, to our life today, and. Yeah, so it's a question that I'm asking myself, how we can engage, use our creativity, use our imagination to rethink the system, to rethink a different system, or think of a different system. Think
also
about a different vocabulary.
Kind of events also,
yeah. Especially, I mean, these type of events are suspicious, obviously, because I don't know. I mean. I read, there was an interesting review of Documenta in the field journal for socially engaged art. And they talked about the response of the local people. So you come with all this good intention, but the only thing that you do is to increase your capital. So we, the indigenous, become the exotic. And you use us as a form of aesthetics.
Yeah. Exotic, yeah.
So, yeah, it's a question. So what can we do? And I think these are the questions that we ask our students. So how you move from, let's say, from public place to public interest. This is another question.
Well, I think to put forward the question is already a good thing. That's number one, I would say. And this is something you need to discuss together. This is not something one can solve, or you know, you can have ideas about it, but I think very important for me, at least, is to discuss these things. Actually, the thing that you do should be that discussion.
Yeah.
So I mean, and also in terms of art, I mean, what kind of projects do you do that would pose perhaps these questions, or maybe that's also interesting. And we have many people here, so maybe we can have that discussion. And also Kartik and Andros, I don't know, in your own project, which would have been part of Rotterdam Triennial, and which you've done in many different countries, Atlas Unlimited, which has many different facets, many different parts. You know, starting in Syria, there's Marrakech, there's. How do you see sort of a new idea or new thinking towards another kind of world, or an alternative world within these works? Maybe that could be a question to you. I mean, I don't know. I think we should be talking about these things. So, would you want to respond to that, or maybe we can just, yeah.
There is another one.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say just one thing I would say is maybe we started from a vantage point of being quite skeptical about discussion, actually.
Okay.
You know, and in fact, some of the most kind of spirited projects I think you showed were that resonate with some of the work that we were, you know, cultivating at the time, had to do with action in a way, right? Like not, you know, the kind of the paradigm of getting people together and talking, which is the fundament of sort of liberal culture, right? That in of itself is a kind of remediative gesture, I think can be really problematic. So in one, just to give one example, like, for example, learning a dance, like imagining a different situation, not as an image, but actually like as a kind of moment As kind of broken as a lot of these structures are, I think one thing that art can do is sort of even psychedelically manifest a sort of alternate reality that can shift the way people think about the expectations of a situation.
Okay. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, okay, I understand your comment about discussion, and you would tend to become a salon revolutionary, right? So we talk about these things, and that's it. I completely agree and understand. Although, for me, it's important to put it in the middle and to, but there's a lot of stuff that we don't know. I mean, there's a lot of hidden information. There's a lot of, in fact, even when you go in Morocco or in Syria, whatever. I mean, if you go to Morocco, it's very French still aligned, you know. So it's not like, if you talk about the colony, what you would expect is not what you would get. I mean, so there's almost a sort of self-orientalizing principle going on there. So you have to work both ways then. So
can I?
Yeah.
I want to ask you to be more concrete in a way. Like, I'm thinking of the 2012 Marrakech Biennial and the strategy that the curators, tried, which was pair the international artist with the local artisan and have the artwork. Like, is that the way to engage? And I'm not going to say whether or not that was successful, but then to look at the problems that you encountered in Rotterdam that you've talked about, and now what you take from that in a concrete way now going into Chandigarh. How, what lessons? How do you not repeat the same errors or the same conflicts, like in a tangible way? Or
well, I'm already repeating them because I'm already traveling there. I'm already engaging with an organization that I know not much about. So basically, either you deal with your aspirations and and you think of something else, another model or another way. So basically, take some steps back actually, and really think about what you've done before and how you would change that, and then move forward, rather than just moving forward constantly. So that's one maybe. I also approach these projects, whether they come about or not, as experience. That might be the same as dancing, right? So it is an experience, but you're doing this with many people, and you're doing this. So going to Chandigarh, learning about the city, I've never been to Chandigarh, learning about the city, meeting many different people, is really a treat. It's really interesting. It nourishes me. So much of the things that also at the Jan Van Eyck, when I came and people asked me, what's your vision, what do you want to do? For me, it amounted to sort of the idea of developing myself and self-development, not to put my ego up front, but to just say that much of what we do has to do with ourselves. And it's important to sort of have this trajectory for yourself, and then you can move forward. So that's one. But then again, you do want to have a project. So I don't know actually, because you're not doing it alone. You're doing this with many different people, and they have different ideas on what these kind of things should be. So this is, for instance, in one of these villages, and they have this system that they ask them 3 questions, and then they need to sort of find out. This is in a school, and they need to find out about these questions, which is really funny. And then they go to Google, and then just take what they find in Google. But it's interesting. I don't know actually. I really don't know how to approach this in the best way possible. Also considering the fact that the question that I posed before, relating to Jan Van Eyck Academie, how does art and design relate to urgency or relate to crisis? So, and as well at the Jan Van Eyck Academy, how does one deal with that? Would I then say, okay, well, I'm going to commit fully to sort of another system where we would not travel anymore, or we would have, you know, these kind of things. So that's why I said discussion is important, because I don't think that then it should, well, of course, you need to have leadership, but I don't think that it is something that you can just force, or you would have to discuss it anyway. So, but then there's a lot of contrast in things, such as if, let's say, at the Jan Van Eyck, we would decide for people to travel less, let's say, and we would expand the period of the residency from 1 year to 2 years, or to 3 years, for instance, so we have less people traveling. But that would mean less people could do the Jan Van Eyck. So it's less inclusive, it's less open in that sense. I find that problematic, but you can't have both. You can't have it being inclusive and being a platform open for people, and at the same time being exclusive because you want to adapt to climate change. So these are the difficulties that you have to deal with. I don't see how to deal with these things without discussion, so that's why I put forward discussion.
I completely agree with you
Okay.
that discussion is important, and we have so many things to explore and to understand how to enjoy the richness of the locale, of being in place and trying to understand these places without all these titles and status and all kinds of ideas that are imposed on them, but try to invert, you know, like the research, so from the top down to understand what is happening on the ground. And I have a question about, actually about similar to that and the previous question. How do you take into account the legacies of such interventions, temporary interventions? Because you invest most of the time in the preparation and in the execution of these exhibitions. What happened the day after the exhibition ends?
Yeah.
What remains? And can you create, I don't know, coming from spatial practices, right? You have the short-term and long-term phasing of a project. Do you have this type of strategies incorporated, not just within the relationship that you offer, but also creating the framework for long-term engagement and transitions?
Yeah, so for instance, for Chandigarh, they want to open a water center that is also for the community, which is a long-term project. But then again, one needs to consider, so how does that relate to art or to your project, let's say, within the realm of art? I do believe that one could sort of, that's the same question actually that I'm posing to Ahmed Oud with the Silent University or to Jan Van Eyck. When you start a social project dealing with refugees or whatever, and this is for the long term, somewhere it ceases to be art. And so I'm then wondering, I think art just has a different role, it's a different realm that takes place. It's not the realm of social work, or not the realm of you're doing something else. So in that sense, permanency does not have to be a factor. So how would you relate permanency to an art project? For instance, the project of Elm Green and Dragset was there for a year. You could extend it to 10 years or 20 years, but would that make a difference? Maybe the sculpture that has been there for 100 years has an effect. You know, see, so permanency was definitely a question in the Rotterdam Triennial, definitely.
I would like to, just one last comment, and then maybe we can engage more people in the conversation. I think I don't want to think in absolute of what is art and what is not art.
No,
and
sure,
the permanent,
sure.
And I think it's also about, especially like with a project like Jane, it's about personal commitment and personal conviction and the need and the desire to help and to stay and go through all the processes and all the difficulties of getting a permit for a bread store. So I think it's up to the artists to decide which process they want to take and how they want to engage with their art. And then people from the outside can say, oh, this is art, this is not art. It has there is an entire industry that does this.
But yeah, that's not what I mean. What I mean is actually when Jan Van Eyck does that, you do the project. Of course, it has the reasons and the intentions of within a social realm, basically, to do these social projects. But then again, it's still an artwork. She's an artist. She does it within her framework of an artist. This is what I'm trying to say. It's that framework that sort of puts it within the representational realm. That's why I'm telling the story of representation or reality. It's sort of an either-or almost. But I might be wrong.
So the permit,
I think.
The permit will be a representation?
No, not the permit, because that would be in the realm of the social. But I think, no, not so much the permit, but the fact that the work is started from an art perspective. So it's part of her work, it's part of her portfolio, let's say. Of course, I mean, within the social realm, we need to deal with a lot of stuff. I'm not saying that you're trying not to sort of instrumentalize these people or because there's a lot at stake. You have to have this kind of responsibility for sure. But that's why it also goes wrong, right? With Loes Veenstra, Loes wasn't so happy about this project. Sorry, the sweaters. She wasn't, no. So, because she felt that Christine took her project and sort of incorporated it within her own, so that it was that Christine sort of instrumentalized her, whilst it was also a celebration, right? I mean, it felt like a celebration. Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, it's a question that I have, so I'm not saying this is, I'm not going to put forward this as a truth or anything like that. It's things I've been thinking about. Yes, please. Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about one of the questions that you raised here, and I would like to hear you more about these. I mean, it's where do you respond, or where from do you respond to a crisis nowadays, right? Mm-hmm. Because in that sense, the museum or the gallery itself seem to be in a crisis, because that's the ultimate place where you want to be, because it's already a place of exclusion, a place where people won't come to engage with the work. And so, of course, then we go through biennials and so on, to the streets, to the city. And then there is the realm of education or the realm of politics.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is maybe the ultimate one,
yeah.
To which you have to move with your artist practice, in a way, to end up having some concrete results. Yeah. And this is what I wanted to hear you more about in terms of your experience with the city itself, with the space of the city.
Yeah.
How did you feel that was actually a place where you could feel that the response and the feedback and the participation of the public, of the viewer, actually provided some more of a space for response to the crisis?
Yeah. I think, I mean, with the Marrakech Biennale, definitely worked out very well. Also for Marrakech, they used it as well for their benefit in terms of the city and, but also the public. There was a real connect, I felt, with at least the version that I did. I mean, in 2012 there were a lot of problems, and so I think that's something that depends on each event that you do, and I think that I'm not against these kind of events at all. I think that biennales, I mean, there's about 200 in the world or something, are extremely important to sort of dissect the fabric of a city, to understand the local situation. That's why I started out with the idea of the local. many of these cities or localities don't sort of have a proper research into their own histories and this is a way of doing that, to invite people from abroad, from elsewhere, to come in and to start sort of to think about and research these places. So I'm for that completely. But then there's a lot of dangers and a lot of sort of situations that you can get in that you sort of maybe want to avoid or to that you at least need to think about. And then that's the part of legacy, let's say. So what remains and what can you change? I mean, Documenta even started some institutions and they are still there. So they did put money into it, but it just, I don't know. Overall, people felt that Documenta didn't work. So it's not only a factor whether it in real reality worked or not, it's also what people felt, right? Whether it worked or not. So, as I would say, these events are important and need to be, and they always start from a personal point of view. Like much of these events are run or founded by people that felt the need for this, such as Vanessa Branson, who started the Marrakech Biennale, or the family Samdani, who's doing Dhaka Art Summit, or the Koch family of the Istanbul Biennale. So there's always private people, or with good intentions, let's say. Except for something like Dakar in Senegal, which is a government, or Gwangju is government instigated. That came out of the independence, and but yeah, I think they're hugely important, and I think that they can have a legacy for sure. For instance, many projects dealing with archives that would bring forward forgotten archives, or that would work on these archives and then they become public, and then there's many examples of this where these things happened. Yeah, so I think that's there.
Can I add something that I was just thinking about, connecting back to this idea of temporariness? Maybe one of the problems of biennials and trials is actually their temporariness of having 3 or 4 weeks or 2 weeks, because in a way you would want to expand that notion or that sort of curatorial strategy of the biennial to a permanent state. I mean, instead of having a biennial...
It would cease to be a biennial, right?
Of course. Instead of being a biennial...
Look at the Contour Biennale this year.
Yeah, but taking this logic of intervening in the city to a more permanent state.
But that happens. I mean, Contour Biennale this year was all year round. Natasha Petrasin-Bagales, she wanted to sort of not have a singular moment, but have many different moments. Yeah, but it created a lot of problems for the organization, you see. So they didn't have 12,000 people at once, but then they had like 800 a weekend or something like that, One of the problems is also sort of the public side of it. It's the expectation as well.
But then that's the issue. If you are addressing a tourist or an art world public that comes in and visits, or if you are actually addressing the inhabitants of the city.
It also depends on where the money is coming from. I mean, the Samdani family, for instance, they put in all of the money, so basically she doesn't have to deal with government agencies, and that you get another kind of situation. But then you get a situation of, let's say, rich people that buy biennials. I think this,
I just wanted to briefly voice like a support for an opposite idea, which is what you've done, which is to create a biennial that didn't exist. You know, because that's equally kind of like interesting, right? I mean, like this is something that Andres and I were working on. It's like deeply weird to watch this talk. Also, as an artist that was involved with the biennial that didn't exist, it's not even kind of like come to the sort of culminating failure of it. I mean, like it's all very strange, but I think like it deals with the kind of like ghostliness of these problems, is that we can talk about them and make PowerPoints about them, but there is something like gaseous and strange and performative about this whole thing that I think, just to say that maybe like a non-existent biennial is even better than a permit.
Yeah. Yeah. A ghost panel, yeah.
Would you like to say something? Last comment?
No, it's funny it's coming from you,
or
because...
shall we end with this?
But I mean,
okay.
Kartik was also, I mean, the Marrakech Biennale also plays a part in the work of Atlas Unlimited, which is interesting. And yeah, well, the question also to you, I mean, why inviting me? Why well, anyways, we didn't know we would be talking about the Rotterdam Triennial, so.
Maybe we invited you, maybe this is a performance,
yeah. Yeah.
It's getting weird.
Yeah.
Well, on the weird note, we are out of time.
Thank you.
So can we just give Hisham one more round of applause and thank you.